Good morning. Welcome to this week's training. We've got, first, we're gonna figure out why do they name things like they do. And then second, we'll talk about wetlands, which is really interesting since we're rapidly losing wetlands in South Montgomery, in all of Montgomery County. So it'll be interesting to read that and develop awareness on it. First, a few announcements. For those of you that didn't meet me before, I'm Michael. I'll be part of the training team. The easy way to remember my last name is my house speak. It's the easy way to say it, because if you look at it, you'll go, no, it's not. Few announcements that are here. We had a board meeting this week that I attended, and your class rep was there also. I'll call on him in a minute. One of the one of the things we discussed was VMS, the Volunteer Management System, which is where all of you enter your initial training, all these classes you go to that you get credit for, so you can get graduated this year. It is really important to keep up with those. With it, when you are in VMS, initial training is the drop-down box that you use. Melissa asked if you would also fill in the descriptor field with what the topics were, what the chapters were that we covered, just a few words that are there. It helps her very much in validating all of that. The second thing is, and this may apply to others, everyone in the chapter, not just the interns. She found that there were some entries for volunteer activities that were not with one of our approved partners, which we can't then validate as volunteer activities. So, two things. One, check the list of approved partners. That's that monster drop-down list that comes. And be sure you annotate in your descriptor field what you did with that partner. If you're working with someone that's not an approved partner and you think that they should be, that's great. We have a couple of folks that will work with you to get them as an approved partner. You know, whether it's a society you're working with, a state park, a wilderness area, a wildlife area, an organization like Woodlands Green, whatever it is. If they're not on the list, let us know. You can even ask one of the training team members, and we can help you with getting to the right person to get that approved, because that's one more thing you can do. So fill in the fields, make sure it's an approved partner, record your training. Be sure you record your volunteer activities within 45 days, because after 45 days, they can't validate them. The reason for that is not that you didn't do it, it's that some of these actually generate dollars back to the organizations you're volunteering for, and they have a approval cycle that's about a 45-day cycle. And I don't know if she told you, but in some cases, it's like $24 for every hour you work. Go to these organizations. Not every organization gets that, but those that do love to get that money to go back into their organizations. All right, I think that's the main thing. Ace, did you want to just make a comment? Hey, he is your class rep, in case you didn't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, so a couple things from the board meeting. There's a lot of cool volunteer opportunities coming up, but they'll talk about those in the chapter meeting, so I don't want to spoil Letha's fun in announcing those, because she seemed really excited to announce some of those new things. But the 20th anniversary is coming up, and I believe, Michael, you said y'all need help planning that still?
Yeah, there are several committees
Yes.
working, making videos, looking at the past, gathering information, preparing for the anniversary celebration that could use volunteers.
So that was the other big note, was that the committees need help. So if you want to join a committee, there's still a lot of gaps on the committee. So just talk to Michael Shelley, or literally anyone, I guess, to join those committees. The Montgomery Pollinator Garden, we do have a lot of support for that, but still need lots of help with that project. If you're interested in that project, you can come talk to me, Larissa, Shelley, also literally anybody. Other than that, that was pretty much it at the board meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just as a sidebar to that, last year, I was in the training class last year. And at the end of the class, they were asking for volunteers to help with the volunteer appreciation dinner, which happens in November. And I volunteered, And I learned a lot about the chapter and about volunteering, being part of that. So this year's anniversary celebration will be a great opportunity to, number one, give volunteer hours. They count as volunteer hours. And number two, you learn a lot about the history of the chapter. You meet a lot of people, in the chapter that you don't meet just coming to the intern meetings. So I would encourage you to do that. As a matter of fact, you can see Stephanie, Ashley, Janet, and myself, we're all part of last year's intern class. So they captured a bunch of us to do volunteer work, and we do love it. All right, now on for the main event. We're gonna start this morning. Our first presentation is on why is it named that? Preston Bryant is gonna be our presenter. Preston has been our chapter advisor for a while now. And he's moving on. He's moving up, moving on out. He's just taken a position as Texas Wildlife Health Specialist for basically most of the state of Texas. You know, because he says it's the eastern 1/3. Well, most of us believe that's where most of Texas is. Everything west of that is just either a big mountain or flat. So, Preston is Texas A&M Aggie, class of 16. I have to say that because so am I. And I'm not gonna take any more of his time. So Preston, it's all yours.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, okay. We're gonna see how we do here. Okay, it's staying up. For those of you who are blessed and do not struggle annually with seasonal allergies, I envy you. I have been struck yesterday with the pollen count and my voice is struggling because of it. So if you can't hear me, just give me a, hey, crank it up and we'll try it more. It's okay. The more I talk, the more it'll come out. So hopefully it just doesn't come out towards y'all. Anyway, so my name is Preston Bryant. Like he said, I am your current advisor for Heartwood chapter. Before I was the district wildlife biologist for Walker County and Montgomery counties. So with that, whoever in here knows what a wildlife biologist is, can you please raise your hand? Not a soul. That's a fun group. Oh, we got one. There we go. There we go. Cool. Was wildlife biologist.
Yeah, that's why I didn't want to raise my hand.
You saw right through my facade here. It's okay. Give me summarize it in one word. And you can't use wildlife biologist as the word. Agrone works too. That's accurate.
Ecosystems with the abiotic and biotic surroundings of the.
I like that. Yeah, that's perfect. So just talking ecosystems of both biotic and abiotic communities. For those of you who did not know her, 2 presidents before your current president, she asked me to do this presentation for the training group. And if you know anything about natural sciences, you know how funny that is. Because whenever you're asked to do talks over taxonomy, you think, why me? Because taxonomy is the driest subject. Think about a pile of dirt and it's drier than that. So hopefully we can make this a little bit better than a pile of dirt. But a little bit about me. I'm a native East Texan from a little town of 200, halfway between Lufkin and Beaumont. So deep East Texas, middle of the piney woods. You get lost, turn around the tree, and then you get lost behind the shrub, and then that's where we are. I grew up in a town that the natural world is not only a part of us, but it's part of how that town operates. Logging and the timber industry was the identity of that town. So wherever I grew up, I couldn't see myself doing anything but something to do with nature, the outdoors. Naturally, as a young man coming out of high school, my first inclination for jobs in that field was veterinary medicine. So I went to the greatest university on the face of the earth, If you don't agree, I'm sorry, you're wrong, but Texas A&M University for veterinary medicine. I soon realized to become a veterinarian, you have to study. I didn't think that was a qualification before, wasn't on the brochure. So after the first semester of realizing, hey, you can't take bio, chem, physics, and statistics all in the same semester and expect to do well, that I needed to choose a different career. Because going on to a doctorate level program where your undergrad GPA matters was not in the cards for me. So I started volunteering, looking around at other careers, and I ended up volunteering with the local wildlife biologist for my county. His attitude towards nature, the outdoors, and the work he did was infectious. He carried a sense of just joy and passion with him with everything he did. And it really instilled in me a sense of like, hey, there's other options, other careers out there in natural resources other than ag teacher veterinarian, which from a Talent 200, that's kind of the options they gave you. They didn't say you could be a soil scientist. They didn't say you could be a meat scientist. They didn't say you could be a wildlife biologist. Excuse me. So after volunteering with them, I changed my career path at A&M, went into the wildlife and fishery realm. And after A&M, I went and got a master's in range and natural resource management on the other end of the world. And by that, I mean El Paso. At Alpine, at Sul Ross State University. Another really, really cool place. Super, super unique. It is, most people don't count Terlingua, but it's the main town next to Big Bend National Park. So if you're going to Big Bend, people go there one of two ways. They go to Marathon, go straight down, or they pass Marathon, go to Alpine, go straight down. Those are the only ways. Literally, there's two roads in. That's well, maybe a third coming from Del Rio, but those aren't as pretty. We talk about the pretty roads that go through the mountains. So got my degree there. I studied Rio Grande wild turkey translocation and ecology. We translocated wild turkeys from a panhandle of Texas into a ranch just north of Big Bend National Park on a restored riparian ecosystem on Terlingua Creek, which is a large watershed that's a tributary to the Rio Grande. Its confluence to the Rio Grande is at Santa Elena Canyon. So it's the first large creek out of the flats called the Coconut Mesa Flats into the Rio Grande. So my time there got to really help me understand what it means to be a wildlife biologist. It helped me get a good baseline knowledge of statistical analyses, ecological modeling, and the operation of doing the science, as they say. So I asked the question of who in here knows what a wildlife biologist is, because that's not a common thing people know. My wife likes to use me as her party trick when we go out, saying, hey, guess what he does? And they're like, what? And she's like, you will never guess. And then they always think I'm Steve Irwin out there, you know, rustling the crock. Or they think I'm, shoot, there's another one up here that I like. So a park ranger. That's the most common thing. Most common thing I'll get is I'm a park ranger associated or working at a specific national or state park. Or I'm a game warden out there busting criminals, doing the Lord's work, making sure wild things, wild places are safe. While both of those things, in a way, can be true, they aren't holistically what I do. My job is to work in Texas specifically because we're 95 to 98% privately owned. It's to work with the private landowner. I am the expertise, the technical expertise to help that private landowner steward their shared resources, to help them use their resource of their property to benefit the shared resource that we all own, which are the wildlife. I don't know if y'all have covered this yet or not, but wildlife in North America are managed through what we call the North American model of wildlife conservation. That is what separates us from other countries in the world. Under that model of conservation, North America and Africa have had a decline in endangered species and an incline in species abundance and diversity through that model of conservation. That model of conservation, very high point, has 7 key tenets. Of those, the wildlife are owned by the people of those areas, not by the state. State owns nothing, not by private individuals. Well, yes, but by the public. And they are managed in trust with a fiduciary responsibility by your local governments. And that's why Parks and Wildlife exists. We exist to manage the wild systems of Texas for the benefit of all Texans. Same thing for Iowa, Maine, Missouri, South Africa, Zimbabwe, all the countries of Africa. So I like this graph or figure because it gives a good overview of the pictures I have in my mind about what I do on the daily. You know, sometimes I like to think I'm out there wrestling crocs. I do that sometimes. Absolutely. There was a time in last July. Oh, I have like 7 of those in my pocket. Thank you, though. That I was wrestling alligators. We had an alligator management situation where we had to take some larger individuals and take them out of that system. And then there's a situation coming up at the end of the month where we're going to the Panhandle and we're capturing mule deer and elk, radio transmitting them, putting a collar on them, taking genetic information and blood work to do studying on them about disease prevalence and resistance. So absolutely, we do some of this cool stuff that you see Steve Irwin do and on National Geographic. But the other side of the coin is doing things like this, talking to people, teaching them about what's outside their doors, and then also doing all of the fun Excel sheet, computer programming, the stuff that's on the brochure. So as a wildlife biologist, once people realize, hey, I'm a little bit more than a park ranger, I'm a little different than a game warden, they say, that's awesome. You know what? I saw this bird on my feeder the other day. Can you tell me what this is? 9 times out of 10, that's a question. That's where the conversation goes. And I love that because it shows a genuine curiosity about what's outside. It shows that they are wanting to know, learn, and explore. So this is very common things I get. Who here can tell me what these are? Real quick, show of hands. What's on the right? What's that?
Turkey vulture.
Turkey vulture. Okay, what's on the left?
Yarrow.
Yarrow? Carrot? Okay, all really good answers. So the thing is, sometimes this is easy. Like what Mr. Richard said, that was a turkey vulture. How do you know? You can do really quick identifying marks like the primary and secondary flight feathers on a bird. They give you good ID indicators for specific bird species. Between a black vulture and a turkey vulture, you notice the secondary flight feathers for a turkey vulture are white. Black vulture, they are not. Additionally, turkey vulture has that red head. Black vulture, a black head. So sometimes, hey, it can be a snap, boom, got it, done, end of story. Other times, it can be a lot more nuanced. So a wild carrot, wild parsley, very much so. There's, I believe, 4 different species of plant, 4 to be exact, that look very, very similar here in East Texas. Queen Anne's lace, wild carrot, poison hemlock, and a few others. It's important for this ID because poison hemlock is the most poisonous plant in North America. Queen Anne's lace is not. And the difference between the two are as subtle as the queen has hairy legs. So there are hairs up and down the shoots of Queen Anne's lace. Poison hemlock are smooth. Poison hemlock has purple dots up and down it. As well as, you can't see in this picture, but one of the two, and I never remember which is why I don't go eating these, has a little orange speck in the middle of the flower. So sometimes when they say, hey, here's this picture and it ends up being a blurry picture of something where the cameras move, sometimes I can get an ID. Sometimes it's like, hey, that's cool. See if you can get a couple other pictures. Or if it's a plant, hey, let's get some pictures of the flower, stem, the root system if you have it, various other key features. Which brings us into the realm of taxonomy. Taxonomy is literally splitting hairs. It's the study of classification and categorization of different species and animals. So this is how we classify which animals are related to each other and how closely they may or may not be related. I'll start with this gentleman here, Mr. Carl Linnaeus, known as the father of modern taxonomy. And he's important because he created the system that we use for categorization. Excuse me. You'd think I could talk instead of just like growl, but it must affect my enunciation as well. Anyway, so what's important about Mr. Linnaeus is whenever he created this system, he also named, oh, wrong button, a ton of different animals. To date, there are a lot of different species of animals and plants that still have Linnaeus as the specific epithet or the scientific name, which is super, super unique, meaning he's the one who classified that species way back in the 1700s, I want to say. Yeah, 1700s. So taxonomy, practice of categorization or classification of species. Now, what it does is it's based off of phylogeny. Phylogeny is the evolutionary history of an animal. Now, 3,000-foot view, we're not getting into the nuance of the weeds about gaining traits versus losing traits and how dichotomous keys are made, although we're going to touch on dichotomous keys here in a moment. Essentially, it's saying through the theory of species evolving and changing, that is how these animals are and plants are split up into these different classes or clades. Essentially, the concept is you're going from the most broad, and each step down, you get through a series of yes, no questions, knock out a bunch of different species. So essentially, you knock out your prawn, your krill, your shrimp into this one, then you knock out your birds and further until you get to the exact species you want. So why is it important? Well, if I told you, hey, I saw a puma, that may mean one thing to this room, but we go to Central America and that may mean something different. It could mean a jaguar or a mountain lion. So there's a ton of different species that have a bunch of what we call different common names. My wife's favorite common name for a snake is, oh my God, go kill it right now. It's not a common name for a snake. But I've heard people call Texas rat snake a chicken snake, a black snake, that long snake over there, that thing you need to go get. I've heard people call eastern gray squirrel a cat squirrel. It's very, very common back where I'm from. But in certain instances, and especially in scientific literature, these common name differences can really make or break the intent and what you're trying to get through to the group you're talking to. So I have a quick list here of some species that have their proper name and then some other common names. Can y'all think of some others? Anything off the top of your head? No, it's the way they am. It's okay.
Gaspergoo or freshwater drum.
Gaspergoo, I've heard that one. I did not even think of that. Oh my God.
What? Freshwater drum, Gaspergoo.
Why did I not think of that one?
I love that one.
I am disappointed in myself. Oh man, thank you so much. I need to put that on there. So this is kind of a general breakdown of what it is. Again, going from our most broad to our most specific, which brings us to the two names that we use in scientific literature. We have the common name, the lion, and what we call the scientific name or binomial name. Binomial means two names. binomial name utilizes the two most specific names to that species. Sometimes, in some instances, when we have a subspecies, it'll have species and it'll have an even more specific clade at the lower than that, which is your subspecies. In that instance, it'll be a trinomial name. It'll be the genus, species, and subspecies that's written in scientific literature. So it's one of those instances where if your mom yells at you and she says, "Trust me, Brian," I'm like, "Oh, stand up straight." Like your commanding officer just yelled at you in the military. You know things are getting serious. So if we look at the God-given name for white-tailed deer, that's its full name. Going from the most specific, Eukaryota, Amelia cordata, Mammalia, Artiodactyla, Cervidae, Odocoleus, virginianus. Say that twice, and you're already tired. So if y'all want to, we can walk through this. You can really test to see if I remember my taxonomy or not. But essentially, each step down, you're going to either gain traits from the that were not in the prior traits clade, or remove traits that were in the prior clade. Odocoleus is a good example here. Odocoleus are your medium-sized cervids, and they're named after their teeth, which are hollow. So odo meaning hollow tooth, odontocoleus, so hollow tooth. Flipped the other way around because it's Latin, and Latin makes sense, right? The other, important fact, for scientific names, we use exclusively Latin. Why? It doesn't change. It is what's considered a dead language. So unlike English, where through generations and through time, our dialect changes. Think of like the term groovy, hip, and cool, all meaning the same thing, but each generation it changes. Latin does not. Because of that, it's standardized. And because it's standardized, we can let Odocoleus maintain its meaning even since the 1700s. So that's why we use Latin for scientific names. I can just tell y'all are riveted. Y'all all gonna be taxonomists now. It's just burning desire in your hearts. But when it comes to, if you're looking up a scientific study, if you're looking up even what's a term for a magazine article? Pop article. Sometimes in these articles, they'll say white-tailed deer. Sometimes they will say white-tailed deer with Odocoleus virginianus in parentheses. Couple other important facts when we're looking at binomial names. Whenever you see it written, it's always italicized. That indicates it being the scientific name. Additionally, your genus always starts with a capital. Your species name is never capitalized. Minor nuance, but sometimes whenever I was first looking at this, it made no sense to me. It took me 3 years before I finally started always italicizing them. Matter of fact, on my thesis, I had white-tailed deer in there, and I had Rio Grande wild turkey. And I remember this to this day because my advisor sat down with me and was like, "Do you know what you're talking about?" Because there were 73 times that he had to italicize the scientific name for Rio Grande wild turkey. It's like, this is why we have autocorrect. Autocorrect saves scientists. So there we go. Now, when we're talking about scientific names and talking about the fun that is with scientific names, as with most everything, including natural resources, there's going to be some exceptions. And what do you think the exception is for scientific names? Any ideas? Birds. Birds in North America are the exception. So birds in North America are the exception because, I want to see that. Sorry. It's a little joke. No, it was funny that I saw that joke for the first time in undergrad, and it made no sense to me. essentially, for those of you who don't know the joke, there's a pop culture joke that started maybe in the early 2000s that were saying like, birds aren't real. They are government spy drones and they're sent to spy on us. That's why there's so many pigeons. So it's a, now in the ornithological circles, that's a common joke. Like, that's not a bird, that's actually a drone. So fun little thing. But when it comes to scientific names, birds are the exception because of these two governing bodies down here. The American Ornithological Society is the largest ornithological society in the world. They have done amazing work in the realm of birds and ornithology, specifically for making it easier on scientists. So what they have done is they have created a standardized system for naming and using names for birds. Now, in scientific literature, when you're looking at studies and peer-reviewed articles, you'll still see scientific names, but the difference is in scientific circles, the scientific name is what you will not hear spoken. Now, if you listen to scientists and they talk about mammals, talk about amphibians and reptiles, you'll hear them say the scientific epithet. For birds, they will not, because a crow is a crow is a crow. You don't have other common names for crow. If you do, they're not an accepted common name. So they'll never be written or published anywhere. Because these two societies have essentially standardized that formula and have accepted certain names for certain animals. American robin is an American robin. It's not red-breasted, cuckoo, something like that. So birds being the only exception make things a little bit easier and standardize this process for us for scientists for a little bit. Now, something fun. When we're looking at taxonomy, I mentioned earlier that it's essentially breaking things down from the most broad to the most specific through a series of yes/no questions. So think of these yes/no questions as easy as, are they a single-celled organism or multi-celled organism? That's your eukaryote breakdown. Archaea, eukaryote. Okay. Then it can be as complicated in some fishes. Whenever I was doing ichthyology, there was breaking, I don't remember the exact fish, I think it was a saltwater fish, but it was breaking down two species of fish based off of average length of the third ray fin on the dorsal fin, down to the millimeter. Certain species of fish, their average length landed in 23 to 27 millimeters. The other landed in 17 to 6 or 17 to 20 millimeters. So these things can be super, super specific, or they can be really, really broad and simple. What scientists have agreed on is when you're trying to determine where a species lands in relation to another, the simplest path is the most likely. So, for example, if you say the species lost the adaptation for flight umpteen years ago and then gained it again, that's not a simple path. You're going this way to go back this way. So then, in theory, they never lost the adaptation for flight. That's a more simple path. So whenever we're creating keys called the dichotomous key to determine what is a species. So if someone comes to me, and let's talk plants because plants are my Achilles heel, and they say, hey, here's a picture of this plant. I don't know what it is. What I'll say is, okay, give me a few pictures. We look at the pictures and it turns out it could be one of three plants. But these three plants are so close together, I can't break them apart based off of pictures. So then we'll go pull the plant, pull a sample from the plant, kind of depending on what the dichotomous key calls for, bring it into my office, and I'll break out my dichotomous key. So I'll show you all dichotomous keys in a second. With my dichotomous key, I can either start, if I really don't know what it is, and someone just walks in my office and slaps something on my desk, we'll start at page 1. And I didn't bring it today, but my dichotomous key is that thick.
Oh,
or Central Texas plants. Only Central Texas plants. The East Texas one's that big, West Texas one's that big, Panhandle one's that big. So we can start on page one and work our way down till we find it. Takes a long time. Or we can kind of start where we think it might be and then work backwards. That's my favorite method because it's more efficient. But what it is, I'll take that plant, I'll start, let's theoretically say start page one, and we'll start breaking it down off these series of yes, no questions. So fur, no fur, okay, it has fur, so it's this. No fur, so it's down here between feathers or no feathers. And we start breaking it down until we get to the exact species. Make sense?
yes.
Following so far? So that's where we get into the difference and the price point, if you will, between dichotomous keys and field guides. Most everybody, even children, are familiar with field guides. They sell field guides at the checkout line of HEB. I'm sure you've all seen them. Sometimes they're in a little trifold, sometimes they're in a little book. Field guides are amazing. I love field guides. Usually field guides have colloquial knowledge in them, anecdotal knowledge that may be very specific to that area. Okay, a dichotomous key is significantly more expensive, and I tried buying one yesterday for East Texas because I realized I didn't have an East Texas one, and very hard to get unless you go through online book retailers. Barnes and Noble does not carry dichotomous keys. I know that broke your heart. I'm sorry. I'll give you a moment to read. But a field guide is the simple picture way to do things. So here's a field guide on top. You notice I'll have a picture of that plant and then a little bit of information, maybe general sizes, maybe the ecotype it likes, soil type, yada, yada, yada. And then sometimes even field guides will have a very simplified dichotomous key. It won't be from looking at all North American plants and breaking it down like that. It may be just saying from East Texas trees and starting at that point. Whereas your dichotomous key is very academic, to put it politely. Not many pictures, not a fan myself. I like a good picture book. Give me pop outs and I'm having a great time. But a dichotomous key really heavily relies on descriptors and text to break things down. So this page here alone, this is one species right here. That's a species, that's a species, that's a species, that's a species, that's a species. That descriptor gives ecological information and identifying characteristics of that species, but not a lot, because further ahead, those identifying characteristics are spelled out in terms of the yes, no, this, or that questions. The beautiful thing about a dichotomous key, even though it may be a solid 6 inches, you don't always go through the whole thing. For example, whenever I was keying out a wildflower, which I do not remember what it was. Also, side note, what I like to do, if you ever buy a dichotomous key and you get a plant and you key it out, tape it to that page. Literally, tape it to that page on top of its little drawing. And then you always have an example to go back to. It was super helpful for me to learn basic plants. Anyway, with this wildflower, I started page 1 and I went my way through. But luckily, page 2, it said, if this, flip to page 5. If this, flip to page 374. So luckily, in instances like that, you don't have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can go way back here. And then what happens in my instances, I'll go from page 5 to 374, realize I made a mistake because I didn't count right, and then go back to page 5. This is why it takes me a long time, usually 3 hours to get through one of these. But it helps you learn these characteristics and helps you get better at your really fine scale identification. And in case you haven't noticed, it makes you really want to learn your common species so you don't have to go through this pain in the butt every time. So if you have a piece of paper, can you please make a dichotomous key for me for these 4 taxa, if you will? So take the group of 4 And then through a series of yes, no questions, 3 questions to be exact, break them out into their own individual things. So, for example, the first question can be, is real is a cartoon? If it's real, boom, you already knocked one of your 4 out. Make sense? Okay, go. I want to see what the most creative one is. I like this one because there is no right or wrong answer. It can be as specific as you want it to. You can say Minnie Mouse sings this one specific song in Fantasia. That's okay. That's right. I'm not gonna tell you it's wrong. You can say one of them's a sidekick because one is. Does anyone have a breakdown ready for me? Or are we still thinking? Let's see what you got.
Let's start with the easy one that you gave us, real or not, so then the 3 on the right.
Okay.
Then I said drawn with clothes.
Okay.
So that would put, the
Yeah.
Mickey and Minnie, and then with female and male,
Perfect. I like it. I like it. That's probably if I were to make one, because I wouldn't want to like get super specific and take a lot of time. That's probably how I'd break it out. But like I said, there is no right or wrong answer here. Does anyone have something different?
Yeah.
What you got?
I have real or not.
Okay.
Has food or not.
Okay.
Has pant or not, whether it's
Yeah.
female or male. And has antenna or no, or the other one.
There we go. I like that. I like that. Anyone else? No volunteers? Okay, what you got?
Start with real or not real, and then has a tail, and then has
good one.
eyelashes.
Good attention to detail.
Yeah.
Sometimes I forget that the female Disney characters have eyelashes. It's one of those things that is like a nice little perk that your eye doesn't immediately recognize, but your brain does.
Yes.
Pretty neat. Anyone else? Okay, so I have another one for you. This one has a right answer. So let's test your skills here.
Okay. Mm. No.
You want us just to go with what we see in the pictures or what we know about these?
What you know, or what you see, whichever you prefer.
Okay.
Now, because this has a right answer, feel free to use any background knowledge you may or may not have on these species.
Okay. Mm. Mhm. Okay.
Now, to give you some background into the fun of a taxonomy course is sometimes for like a lab exam, they'll take us in and they'll give us 5 skulls we have to key out. And especially like mammals, okay? A key feature between mammals and marsupials are dentition patterns. So there are specific dentition patterns for certain mammals and for certain marsupials, and then there's a difference between the two as well. So, for example, I could have a coyote and a wolf, and the dentition pattern will be slightly different. And that's a good way to do it. Another feature is in your skull, you have sinuses. Mine are currently full, but in mammals, there are different sinus processes than other mammals. So think a feline and a dog. Your sinuses are going to be different. Also, within, like, let's say the feline and dog, your orbital bone. So the bone that is underneath your eye may be separated or not, and it may have a different shape than other species. So all that to say, you may or may not get the right answer here because some of these will get broken off by some of those characteristics, but given a general background knowledge, you might be able to properly place a few of these. But I think your general spots will be pretty well on point. Does anyone want to volunteer, go through the gamut? If not, that's okay too. What you got? You and me both. We're right there.
I just did it basically on pictures,
Mm-hmm.
dogs on mammals, but then went land and water on land.
Okay.
Maybe predator prey,
Okay.
not mine. Or prey down, pregnant, not pregnant, but you don't know that.
Okay. So a few things to think about with this is all species on the board will consume another animal at one point in their life. They're not all herbivores, which is what we historically think about as prey animals. To give you all a little cheats here, they're not all mammals either up there. The one on the far left is our only native North American marsupial. So if we go over and see the answer, this is what we're looking at. So taxonomically speaking, marsupials break off of mammals way early in the chain. Taxonomically speaking, Lord have mercy, I'm here, guys. That means they are further in relation from mammals than closer. Their ancestor, their ancient ancestor, is much further back in time than it is closer to present day. Then we break out into what we call carnivora. Carnivora are your carnivores, okay? Specifically, obligate carnivores, where they cannot consume plant material. Then breaking down from carnivora, you have your, let me see if I get it, Orlodiidae, which are your seals, and something else. Then your Procyonidae, which are your raccoons. So if you notice, the raccoons are more closely related here to your seal than they are to mountain lion, which is way up here. Wow. Just to show you how taxonomists break things out. Literally, they are splitting hairs, for better or worse. So take that as you will. Now, if we're looking at plants, that was kind of the creepy crawly side. This is the stand there and photosynthesize side. We do things a lot off of size with plants. So centimeters, millimeters, meters, etc. Then we also look at things like leaves. Leaves are really important for plant ID, which is why it makes things really difficult and not fun in the wintertime when plants go dormant, because then you're relying on shape of branches and the type and kind of bark they have. But few examples of what we're looking at for leaves is looking at leaf shape and leaf arrangement. So think the typical teardrop shape, which is going to be your spatulate, or you're looking at your classic lanceolate shape, I call that length, there it is, linear and subulate. But then also you're looking at arrangement. Now, the good thing is within plant taxonomists, this is a abbreviated list. There are tons of leaf shapes. For the most part, when you're looking at plants, you can usually look at leaf arrangement first and then go off of a general leaf shape. Okay. Field biologists like myself, I'm not a plant taxonomist. I'm not going to call something linear over subulate. I'm going to say that shape, shaped like a finger. Because a lot of times I'm working with private landowners. And if I go up to Joe Smith on his property and say, you have a eastern elm because it has the leaf shape of, where's the elm leaf shape? Elliptic, he's going to say, what? Excuse you. Sometimes having the discretion to know when to get overly specific versus overly general is a good thing. It's not going to benefit him managing that resource to become overly scientific and potentially offend him, saying, hey, I know more than you, and you should submit to my authority. Sometimes meeting someone where they are and helping foster the amount of learning they want in that moment does more than slamming them with the textbook and saying, I am the scientist and you will listen to me. So I don't use these a lot. I know what they are, obviously not well enough, but I'm familiar with these shapes and what they mean. And most importantly, I know where to go to look them up if I'm reading a scientific study that breaks these down based off of leaf shape. Now, what I was saying about orientation or arrangement is understanding the type of arrangement the leaves make coming out of a node. So a node is the point at which on the stem the leaf grows. Okay, so if you think about a pecan tree, everyone have a pecan tree in their mind? Has anyone grabbed the leaf on a pecan tree? Okay, a pecan tree's leaf is this guy or this guy. This is closer to a black walnut because they're much more leaves, much more leafage than a pecan is, but it's that same leaf arrangement, meaning that's one leaf. For those of you who may not realize, the node is here. All of these leaves are leaflets growing out of the same node. So a black walnut, a pecan, or even a fig, well, fig's really low. Anyway, all of these different trees like that or plants like that, fern, another good example, have many leaflets out of one leaf node. So even though you may pull an individual leaflet off and say, hey, this is a pecan leaf, really that's one of the leaflets, and you're getting a very micro picture of what gives you more context of the actual leaf. Okay, so if you look at a pecan leaf again, remember the leaf is the main thing coming up with all of the leaflets coming off of it. If you look at these leaflets, they're coming off opposite of each other. That's what we call an opposite arrangement. And if it were the leaf, that would be opposite leaf arrangement. Now, if you were looking at a pecan, let's pretend the leaflets come out here and they come out here. That's an alternate leaf arrangement. Okay, opposite, alternate. Now, another higher classification is world. World is where they all come out in the same spot at different degrees from each other, making a fan shape. So that's the technical name for opposite. And I don't see world on here. There it is. Thank you. So leaf shape. Then again, overly specific, and if you need me to slow down or stop because this is getting way too deep into the textbook, just throw something at me. I'll probably get hit. If not, I'll dodge. But Looking at leaves, okay, we can go even more finite into looking at vein patterns or ventition to seeing how those leaves are broken up. And then looking at the margin of the leaf. Different leaves have different margin. Here in a minute, we might walk outside and try to see if we can see a couple different ones to break out to show you the exact difference between those margins. So these are all species of East Texas oak. Can anyone tell me what they are? What's this one?
Water oak.
White water post. Okay, I like it. What about this one? Water, consensus on water. What about this one? Water again. What about this one? Live, look at y'all. What about this one? Red. What about this one? Chinkapin. What about this one? Swamp laurel oak. Man, that was a lot better than I thought. So these are your answers. Pretty dang close, guys. Pretty dang close. This one's stumbled people up. I expected that. It's pretty uncommon. These are all East Texas native oaks. That one is much more of your bottomlands area. So think riparian areas. And it was much more common prior to the logging revolution of East Texas. It grows slow. It grows really dense and makes fantastic lumber. But because it's a slow grower and it's in these sensitive areas, it has a hard time. Beautiful tree. If you have one, highly recommend you plant one. They're amazing. Chinkapin was another one I really didn't expect y'all to get. Very impressed. Good job. Live oak, very, very common one in this area. Very classic leaf shape. Water oak was one. I was trying to decide how bad I wanted to mess with y'all or not. Why is that for water oak?
Leaves look different. They're not all the same.
Water oak has 5 different leaf shapes on the same tree. So usually the best ID for water oak is looking at the canopy and saying that leaf is different, that leaf is different, that leaf is different, must be a water oak. Then red oak is the main breakout between these. We essentially in Texas have red oaks and white oaks. Black oaks are also in there closer to like a walnut, but for the most part, let's simplify it to red and white. Red oaks are deeply lobed like white oaks are, but they have, I forget the term for it, maybe it's on the last slide, but essentially a little hair off the tip of the leaf, and they come to a very, very acute point. So different ID with red and white. So let's see if y'all got this. These are 2 different plants, I promise. What is this guy? Oh, dang it. I cheated. What is this guy? These buttons are too small, I tell you. Ilex vomitoria, man. Okay, how about this? Privet. This is a closer look at each of their.
On the right, because it's opposite.
Correct. So this is the exact example I'm talking about between leaf arrangement. Native Ilex vomitoria, otherwise known as Yopon holly. They have opposite leaf arrangements, exact same leaf shape, but also you notice, look at the wavy edges on that leaf versus the smooth or entire edges of the Chinese privet. Also opposite. The cheat code with Texas, I'm not going to say North America because I'm going to get way over my skis there, but Texas plants is opposite is a very, 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 very uncommon leaf arrangement. So much so that in dendrology, there is a mnemonic that they taught us that I remember. Yeah, sure. I remember essentially breaking out dogwoods because dogwood is another opposite leaf arrangement plant. All that to say, you see a plant that's opposite in Texas, it should stick out saying, hey, something is different about this plant, and it should help you when you're looking at your dichotomous key or looking at your field guide to get a little bit more specific about what plant it is. So kind of like what we're talking about, the opposite leaf arrangement Y'all change leaf arrangement. So what we're gonna do, we got a little bit. I did not scout out ahead of time. I'm sorry to say. So this is gonna be an adventure for all of us. But we're gonna walk outside, see if we can find some plants, and I want y'all to point out to me the things you're thinking about if you're trying to ID this plant. So leaf arrangement, what about the leaf arrangement is unique? Leaf shape, leaf margins, things like that. You could even go as specific, if you know the soil type, then go for it. Depending how far we are from this pad, it's probably gonna be clay. But, cool, let's do it. We'll go out this door and we'll go into this little wooded area right here.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, everybody, for coming down. Thanks, Tristan, for the time and information. The next session we have is on wetlands. I mentioned earlier, we're seeing the loss of wetlands at a dramatic rate. I learned in the woodlands proper, there is unidentified wetlands. Anybody know where it is? Canada. It's around Shadow Bend Park. There's an area designated for wetlands, and that's the only that I know of in the woodlands, I think. Here, so they're critical to the ecosystem, but they seem to be the target of a lot of development, movement, people not understanding their value, which is why we have John here to help explain it to us. This is John Stacy. I will let him introduce himself. Well, welcome, John.
Cool, thank you. We got a big class today. I know a few of you. I've run into some of you at different things, so you know, just I'll take this just very casually. If you need to make a pit stop, just you know, go ahead. Here's who I am. You're going to learn that you never get around to reporting all your hours. Take whatever you reported and double it. So that's, this is why I spend my time in the wetlands. I volunteer on a crew that builds nature trails and bridges. Diana knows us well. If you want to look into it, I'm going to point you to the Bayou Land Conservancy. And you can ask them if you feel like getting involved in some of the stuff we do. If any of you ever travel on the Spring Creek Nature Trail or in the George Mitchell, we built that and we maintain that. So a lot of time mucking around down in the water and things, but let's talk about this. Here's what I want you to take out today. First, what the heck is a wetland? Because it's not exactly what you think. What do you have in Texas? Because you want to be a Texas master naturalist, so that makes sense. Why are they important and where are we going with it? So if you can kind of get a basic cocktail level conversation knowledge out of this today, then we've succeeded. It's really easy to say what's a wetland and what's not. Is it got water on it most of the time or a big chunk of the time? Duh, that's a clue. Look at the soil. If you have a heavy clay that's gray and you got it and it sticks to your spade when you're trying to put your garden in, that's hydric. It means because it's underwater so often, there's very little oxygen in that soil. It gets compressed. If you have a hydric soil, you know that, you know, if you're trying to buy a lot to build a house on and you kick a dirt clod over and it's dark gray, you might want to do a little more research. The same goes if it's got a palmetto on it. You know, that's an indicator. I don't care what the developer said. If you got palmettos, you're on a wetland, okay? So those three things, wherever you go in the world, define a wetland. Is it wet? Does it have wet soils? does it have species that are typically found in wet places? And that's really all there is to technically defining a wetland. But I get to steal other instructors' stuff. Because you're gonna have to have geology and you're gonna have to do hydrology. And you're gonna say, I already heard this. Because I've got to tell you some of this, or talking about wetlands doesn't make any sense. Map Texas, map of the major waterways in Texas. In case you've never looked at a map like this, what jumps out at you?
All what?
Nothing on this side, just one side.
Come on.
The east side is full of water.
Yes, they're all running in the same direction. Okay, so these are watersheds. So when you have topography, drainage, it merges, it flows, and what moves water?
Gravity.
Gravity. And that's part of the story.
Okay.
Okay, as you go through this kind of program, you're gonna hear about the different regions of Texas. And at one point, they're gonna say there's 21 regions. Then they're gonna say, well, there's 12 regions. And then they're gonna say there's 7 regions. That really ticked me off. It's like, can't these academic clowns get their act together and at least agree how many regions there are? And it turns out the reason for that is because they're talking about different purposes. So if you're talking about geological regions, well, then you have to specify that if you're talking about, whatever. But again, what do these shapes, these are the geological in time, old, not so old, young. Do you see the same pattern you saw with the waterways? Yeah. Anybody here have any relatives who've worked in the oil industry? Do you have neighbors? Why is the oil industry here and not in Des Moines or Boston?
There are new areas there. What are nice.
These highlands, 66 million years ago or so, the coast of Texas was about here. If you drive to Austin, you're driving along and all of a sudden you're going up Balcones Fault. This area, go back here. This area is much older. This was underwater. This was the bottom of the ocean. And as the climate changed, things dried out. The ocean receded back to what's now the Gulf of Mexico. And as it did, water evaporated here. When salt water evaporates, what's left? Water, salt water. Water goes away. What's still there? Salt. Bunch of chemists here. I love it. So you have layers of salt sitting down, crushing all the decomposing forests and jungles that were on the land. When that happens, that creates what we call oil. And it gets trapped under the salt. Its levels, a geologist would be throwing rocks at me for simplifying this, but that's why you have deposits of oil all along these coasts in Louisiana. And also, have you heard of a salt dome? Yeah. So you have pressure, but those domes of salt can rise up over time. So we have salt domes which can be impermeable, so we can drill holes in them and store gas in them, store oil in them, things like that, because we have salt domes and we have oil because of that receding coastline. And that, again, impacts the water, impacts the hydrology, impacts your neighborhood. So let's talk about that a minute. You have different wetlands. For the purposes of looking at wetlands, we're gonna look at 5 regions of Texas. Not 7, not 3, not 21. I could make it 21 just to mess with you. So obviously, the high plains, think about what you just saw on that geological map. High, they are literally high, okay? So we have the high plains of Texas and the Panhandle. What kind of water do you have up there? You're thinking of
Sweet water,
Fresh.
just regular water.
Fresh.
fresh
water.
and
Alkaline.
Hmm?
Alkaline.
so you haven't got a whole lot of water, do you? Your picture of what's in the high plains and the Panhandle, you're not thinking tropical jungle, are you? I hope.
Yes.
I hope. You're
Subterranean.
thinking sand, lines to rock. So, remember we said it's holding water is a wetland? We said soils, we said plants.
Yeah.
In this region, there's really 2 kinds of wetlands. Playa and a saline pond. I know it's a fuzzy picture, but a playa is basically an area that has no drainage. It captures water when you do get rain, and you'll get some intermittent stream flows into it. And then it just sits there until it evaporates. So it's not feeding a river. It's not the headwaters of anything. It's just, think a big puddle. And as it dries, and again, it's a crummy picture. I stole it off the internet. But you know, you've got some birds that are taking advantage of this ephemeral passing, and they can be big, but then they'll be dry. So that's one kind. Saline lakes are different. People think, well, it's the same thing. It's just doesn't have an outflow. It's intermittently got water, but their chemistry is a lot different. A lot of times saline lakes get periodic rainfall or runoff, but a lot of times they also have water that is percolating up from underneath. And as it does that, it carries minerals with it. Typically what I would call salt, and then the chemist would throw a rock at me again. But you get all these minerals that come up from under the surface, and then the water evaporates because it's in the Panhandle of Texas, for goodness sakes. When that happens, you end up with very, very saline water, if any water at all. Go out to Utah, you know, look at the salt flats, as well as, you know, the lake, what's left of the lake. So very different than a playa. Playa is basically a freshwater puddle, saline lakes, but that's it. When I talk about wetlands for the high plains, I'm not talking swamps, I'm not talking rivers, I'm talking standing bodies of water. South Texas, anybody here ever go down to Padre Island or, you know, get down to South Texas? You gotta want to be there. I mean, it's characterized again with 2, riscatus and interdunal swales. That one is a lot less impressive than the name. Your hydrology and your topography, you're going to run into oxbows pretty much continually. They're everywhere. An oxbow is formed despite man's best intentions. Water goes where water goes. Okay, one day the Mississippi River is going to go blow right through the Chafalaya, and I don't care what the Corps of Engineers says. Whoops. The pointer is in here somewhere. So at one point, the river channel here came up, kind of was going this way, came around, and then it decided, no, I'm gonna go this way, which is now the main channel, you can see. But when it did it, it cut this off. So as you get a meander from any, I'm gonna give up on this, so I can just start waving. As you get the water that brings down the soils, the silts builds up. And then one day the river says, ah, there's too much silt built up there, I'm gonna go the other way, and it cuts a new channel. If you walk out on Spring Creek or the San Jacinto, you'll see this happening. You know, the current comes along, it deposits on the lee side, it cuts the bank, and then one day it decides to go somewhere else. So these become the kind of wetland you get in South Texas, these little cut off back channels. And it's got the water until it dries out. And a pond can take 20 years, depending on siltation. So it's got water, it'll have that kind of soil will start building up because it's underwater all the time. I told you an interdunal swale sounds pretty impressive, doesn't it? If you go to the beach, that's the water behind, you know, where the tide came out, then the water was trapped there, and that's where the kids go running, chasing the crabs and stuff, or the crabs chase the kids, you know. But it holds water, and in South Texas, anything that's holding water, even salt water, has a lot of value for things like birds. So it's really critical. And people don't think of this kind of wetland when they talk about the loss of wetlands. But as we're suffering beach erosion and rising water levels due to that, we cannot speak out loud climate change. Okay. This is an important wetland. West Texas. Anybody here from West Texas? I always want someone from West Texas so they can tell me West Texas in their West Texas accent. You know, it's like, that's what Texans really sound like. So now we're changing. We're talking about kind of the more classic, what you think of probably as a wetland. I don't know if I have a mutiny on my hands or.
No,
No,
we're,
just-
your
you're not being
picture, your
projected.
video's not.
Ignore it behind the curtain. Yes, just ignore all that.
There.
So, West Texas, so you're heading out towards El Paso and you're going out to Arizona.
We're good.
Press escape to show floating meeting controls. Okay. Freshwater springs, makes sense. Riparian corridors. Everybody know what a riparian corridor is? You're a master naturalist, quit nodding. Okay. And we've made progress and now my device doesn't work. Uh-oh. The advancing the.
Yeah, we're looking now.
To get the, and make sure this is active. Oops, oh, okay. Is it working now?
Yes,
Okay.
all right. I'm not gonna show you a picture of a freshwater spring, okay? You're the advanced class, water come out of ground, freshwater spring, okay? Riparian corridor. And you can see this is Texas, you got this limestone getting eaten away, but that's where you've got a water flowing from a headwater and it's flowing down into the larger waterway. And as it does that, it's going to have vegetation. And we're going to talk about riparian corridors a fair amount today because that's a critical concept. Gulf Coast. Again, I'm going to point out two major kinds. Boulevard flats. Okay. Anything that can hold water, even though it's tidal, if it's holding water, it's a wetlands. You probably remember this one, Diana. That's that preserve, you have to use a kayak. Yeah, yeah. So this is down towards the intercoastal waterway. And this is very typical. Most people who look at these things from a car say, what a wasteland, or what a yuck. And they don't realize that's a nursery for just all sorts of species of aquatic life and fish and birds. And it's a very, very productive land. It's miserable to try and walk across, but it's very productive. And here we are home again, jiggity jog, okay? This is what you really care about. 3 kinds, because we're better than the other regions. They only got 2, we get 3. Again, a fuzzy picture, but anywhere from here towards the coast, you have areas that we have moats of trees. They're on a little bit higher land. And then in between those moats, you have MOTTES, not MOA or whatever that is. Then you have, again, the grasslands that are holding water. And again, it's incredibly productive land. Although early settlers and farmers and some to this day think you just need to fill it in and make it productive. This is right around here. So it's a mixed riparian hardwood pine forest. It's on the water. Okay, so think about the trees in your neighborhood. Let's see, loblolly pine. Everybody know what a loblolly pine is? Okay. Where'd the name come from? Loblolly, what a goofy name. Okay, master naturalist quiz. When the Scotch and the Irish came to what is now the United States, the Brits had already beat them there, and the Brits took all the good upland for farming. So the poor old Scotch and Irish had to take the crappy swampy water to try and live on. Loblolly is a bastardized Welsh word for porridge pot. So it's down there in that bog is porridge. And loblollies do very well in water, which explains why they do well here. What's the most common oak tree in your neighborhood?
Black oak.
A water oak. See, it all starts to fall in when you start thinking about the reason you have this climate, this hydrology, and that drives the species and such you have. Other way. And again, we have a riparian corridor. Now, this is a little further downstream from something else. So your water channel's getting bigger, but you have your different mixed vegetation along the corridor. And it literally is a corridor. And that's important for a lot of reasons. When people think of a waterway, generally what they're thinking of is right here. Here's the water. Here's where you walk to the bank and you fish or throw rocks or whatever you do. What very few people unfortunately grasp is outside of that, you have a bank that is actually a secondary riverbank, if you will. So during high water events, storms, a lot of runoff, the water level is going to be up here, not down here. And this area that's not underwater all the time, but it's not going highlands, that is your riparian zone, your riparian corridor. And if you don't get anything else today, this is something to get, because we're going to talk about the significance of that here in a second. if I can remember which button, if I stand on one side. There, now it's on the right, I'll remember, okay. I'm not gonna read these, you can read them because we're gonna talk about them a little bit, but. Wetlands are probably the least appreciated ecological system in the universe. And it's a sad thing. When you have a wetland, when high water comes, floods, major catastrophic rains, it expands into that corridor we just talked about. It floods. And as it does that, it hits vegetation and it slows it down, which is really important to slow down the impact of all that surge of water. It allows time for it to sort of start to percolate. Again, you can read, but when you have a wetland that has vegetation and it's adapted to it, it's native, it's got the root systems that go deep into the soil, it takes that water, a good chunk of it, and instead of just having it pour downstream into Kingwood or whatever, instead it starts absorbing it into the soil. You know, you can read the statistics, but this is something your neighbors don't grasp. And you will talk about it on things like bond issues. Erosion control. So when it slows that water down, it stops the amount of soils that it picks up just to carry downstream. We think one of the ways to stop flooding is to dig a big hole in the ground. And when the water comes, it'll go in the hole in the ground. Well, if you don't control it, that hole in the ground's going to last about 10 years before the silts filled it up. If your neighbor out in the country has a stock pond and he just lets the water run in there, he's going to have it, cleaned out after about 10 years. So having the plant foliage and the root systems holds the dirt in place. Again, it also gives you a little bit of a cushion from the guy that's running cattle, and there's nothing wrong with running cattle, and there's nothing wrong with, building things, but if you get them too close to your waterway, then you've got all that siltation and the water quality goes really badly. You're not going to recharge the deep aquifers. If you want to drive over to the Woodlands High School and get in the parking lot, you'll see the 6-inch crack where we've got settlement due to the aquifer being depleted. If you drive south of Houston, there's a road that will take you around what used to be a subdivision that is now 8 feet underwater. And that's because we've depleted the aquifer from both hydrocarbons and water. Once a deep aquifer is depleted, it cannot be refilled because the soils compress and there's no space. Sadly, Texas has what's called the right of capture. Anybody here have a water well? Not city water? Okay. In Texas, you can put a well on your property and you can pump as much water as you want. Now, there's no limit, which means people like Ozarka buy thousands of acres in South Texas and build a water plant. And that's where the bottled water is coming from. And it's depleting your aquifers. But shallow aquifers can be replaced and water can get into the soil. When you have a wetland to hold it, it allows that to replenish. And when that happens, sometimes where they've restored wetlands in some man-made places, streams that have been vanished for 100 years come back. Because you're basically thinking a sponge. You're getting that sponge full of water again. So even though it's not a deep aquifer, there you go. They filter. They filter tons of contaminants. Again, if you just have runoff onto a farm cropland, it'll absorb a little bit of its nitrogen and such. If you put it into what looks like to most people a swamp, it will do a much better job of holding those chemicals. Now, the flip side of that is when you go in and bulldoze the wetland, you just released all that storage. What was stored in the plants is now free in your atmosphere and in your waters. When you have clean water, the other thing is it's essential for your I think you're going to have a class on water, fauna, whatever, fish, shellfish, mussels, and things like that. If you don't have clean water, you don't have those. The Native Americans who lived in this area, their primary food source was what? Hello, is anyone out there? Everybody still, to get everybody up and do jumping jacks. Shellfish, mussels. If you walk along some of the creeks, you can actually find shellfish middens, which were piles of shells left from generations of Native Americans. Then, of course, they'd migrate to the coast, and then they'd migrate to Central to do some mammal hunting. But shellfish was a big deal in this part of the world. And now, without clean water, it's not. So, habitat. Birders, how many birders do we have? Okay. Texas has about 600 observed species. We're on the Central Flyway, you know, that's why all the birds go into Latin America and Central America. Things like the shrimp industry. Remember all those wetlands we were just looking at? All that fresh water, when the fresh water flows, don't get to the Gulf, you don't get fried shrimp. Okay, it's a direct cause and effect. There was a heck of a battle not long ago over on the Trinity River. I believe it was Dow, it might have been DuPont, has a major plant there that increased their freshwater intake. When you have a processing plant, it uses lots of water, and then they discharged it, and they had treated the discharge, so the water was, you know, not polluted, but the temperatures were way off, and it was wiping out the fisheries out in the Gulf outside the Trinity. So it's kind of a big deal. A lot of enlightened developers now are doing stuff that, like George Mitchell started years ago, which is, hey, I can sell these houses for 25% more if I've got a neighborhood park or it's connected to, you know, a longer trail where people can ride their mountain bikes. People are starting to appreciate that as opposed to just living in a row of houses. So getting out and doing stuff, the wetlands, I mean, you're a mile from a 16-mile trail through the wetlands along Spring Creek. You can go there and do all you want. Look at the birding is great there. But people only look for money generally. The value of the wetlands from just those hiking, birding, RVing things is over 2% of the state's gross product. And that's a lot of money. That's getting into the range of the gross domestic product of the state of Maine. Okay? And that is last session, we had a lady who just wanted to argue the heck out of this with me, but she thought it was different. I said, this is from state of Texas. This is their data, not mine. Okay? So you've got almost $400,000 jobs that are directly contingent on these productive outdoor places. If you've been to Central Texas and you get out there around Concord and Utopia, it's just exotic game farms and VRBOs for hunters, but they bring in a lot of money and they're bringing in revenue to the state, and it's recreation. It's not my preferred form of recreation, but hunting, fishing, skateboarding, I guess, I don't know. But here's what the lady was arguing with me about. She was pointing out that hunting paved the way, or fishing. The traditional recreations in here are the hunting and fishing and that sort of thing. But look at that. That's your birding. That's your photography. That's your people who just want to take an RV and stay down at the coast. And if you don't have those wetlands, you don't have any of this. I mean, not too many people go on a wildlife photography trip to Iowa, I mean, you got to have the attraction. Okay. So what are we going to do about them? We continue to bulldoze them. We continue to have runoff. We pump the aquifer. But one of the things that I think you as citizen scientists can actually reach out and touch is right here. The bottom, those two, you can help educate your neighbors. People don't pay attention to this, and they don't realize what's happening on our coast. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But you can talk to your neighbors and you can vote. And we'll up the wrong button again. On the plain, we've lost 70%. Anyone ever go out to the Katy Prairie? Okay. Used to be a major, and there's not so much left of it anymore. The way things like that, we got about 1% left of what was historically the coastal prairie. So like on the Katy, the way that vanishes is the developers working with their politicians get a road built, and then you have a nice lady who has 1,000 acres out there that's been zoned for ag, and she's paying taxes on that. And suddenly they walk up to the door and say, now you have a nice road in front of your house. So your taxes, your property value has just been quadrupled, and your taxes are going to be quadrupled. And she says, I got 1,000 acres, but I don't have that money. And the developer says, oh, I'll be happy to buy your place. And he does. She doesn't have an option. She's out of money. And then it's houses, not prairie. That kind of thing is going on everywhere, every day. And the only thing that can slow that down is people. They wanted to build an extension to that Highway 529, I guess, right through what was left of the Katy, and enough people raised hell that they didn't. So that's kind of on us. This isn't a big historical deal. In 20 years, North Harris County lost 25% of its tree cover. And what did we lose it to? Roads, subdivisions, parking lots.
I think you're getting my dander.
Good.
Be much higher. I live in Florida, and we here in County, we're 95.
Mhm.
Thousands and thousands of acres are completely clear cut.
I don't doubt it.
Completely clear cut. No, this, it's just.
I used to survey the park there, Little Cypress Preserve, which is at Telge and,
Now, this is far east, this is
Yeah.
over by.
Okay, the other one. But it's same thing there though. That area that I'm speaking of, I used to go along this Little Cypress Creek and then 99 was built and they popped in the subdivisions. And now it's a disaster. It floods all the time.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. I'm not telling you all this so you can go, well, that was mildly entertaining and you leave. I'm telling you, so, you can maybe do what you can do. Remember seeing this before? This time I actually pushed the right button. That's not a mistake. I put this slide in there twice because I told you this was important. People built their houses here because they wanted to be on the river. And now it's flooded 3 times and we've done 3 FEMA, flood insurances on it. And as long as that house is here and not here, guess what's gonna happen again?
Flooding.
Mhm. So when you're a major home builder, you know that we keep saying, well, you can't. Yeah, no, that time it was a mistake. All right, come on back. They say, well, you have to be out of the 100-year floodplain. Okay. So they buy dirt. If you want to go look at the creekside ponds off, I lived there. I don't remember the name. Champions Forest. Not anyway, Creekside Forest. They're digging holes in the ground because they're selling the dirt, or they're using it for their own development to get it laser measured 1/8 above the 100-year floodplain, and then they can build on it. So we have to stop people building and developers building in here. If we don't, we're just going to keep doing FEMA buyouts, and you're going to go. I've mucked people's houses out after hurricanes, and it's tragic. And then they say, well, I'm just going to get the sheetrock in and fix it up. And I'm like, geez, but we have those developments. You can help control this. You can ask your politicians to adopt stricter building codes with higher elevations, things like that. You think you can't, but you can.
Hey, quick question.
Yes, please.
What constitutes the riparian zone? Is it the actual elevation above the channel, or is it just this?
Yeah, they'll actually do hydrologic studies. I mean, very comprehensive. I think they just have been releasing an updated one for most of this part of the world. The city of Houston actually relied on that when they put out their revised code. But there are places, Montgomery County, that have not, and they're using a set of data that's about 12 years old. And as we're going to talk about in a minute, the hydrology of 12 years ago and the hydrology of today ain't the same. So, yeah, what you're trying to do is get people, without getting into statistics, your odds if you're in 100-year floodplain doesn't mean you're 1 in 100 of getting a flood. That's not the way it works. Okay.
Wow.
When people read about rising sea levels, they say, my grandchildren will be dead before then. What do I care? Because it says it's going to come up, 4 inches or something by, whatever. Averages lie. Okay. Remember that geological map of Texas? Shallow Gulf of Mexico. an 8-inch rise in sea level might be 8 inches off the coast of Maine. Here, that would be hundreds of miles of Texas will go underwater because we're flat and your sea is shallow. So there's actually monitors. There's 3 monitors in the woodlands that are showing subsidence. But Galveston, you know, they're losing an inch per year of Galveston from seawater rise. So it's important, and people are thinking they're going to do something. But there's actually a, I'll show it on, let's see, a slide here. Yeah. We have regional water authorities. You're in the San Jacinto Regional Water Authority. And each of those, I think there's 12 of them, submits a plan to the state every 5 years. And then the state comes up with the master plan for, you know, are we going to build dams? Are we going to build levees? What are we going to do to manage our water? Those of you who were born in Texas know in Texas there's an expression that says, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. Water is a big deal, and it's going to be a bigger deal. So in our regional water plan, because I know some of the people here went to hearings, and they came up with exactly the solutions that you come up with in 1930 or maybe even 1950. Build bigger dams, build concrete channels to drain water fast. Remember all that stuff we were talking about before, saying you don't want to drain water fast? If you build a concrete channel up in the woodlands and send it downstream, it's going to get there faster and more. And what are the people downstream going to think about that? It's always get it out of my neighborhood. Get it out of my neighborhood. And not thinking about. The other thing is, if you go anywhere and look at any concrete channels, ditches, anywhere in the world, if they get water, after about 5 or 6 years, you got to be careful walking on them because it's all eaten out around it and everything. They're caving in. The water wins. Water always wins. So concrete channels are so 1930, and they just don't work. In places that have adopted more modern technology, they're actually building man-made meanders and man-made wetlands and stopping construction right up to the riverbank. And it can be done. I took a couple of pictures out from this presentation because I said, yeah, it's a picture of a pond. It wasn't really adding to the conversation. But there's actually, there's societies of professional engineers that studied how to do this in a much more progressive and effective manner, but it's not the way that people expect. People want, we flooded during Harvey. By God, you politicians better get on the stick and do something. Well, what's quick where people can see bulldozers and pickup trucks and dump trucks? Okay. They don't want to see a plant and a bunch of trees. They want to see bulldozers. And that's where you have to try and inform people. The other problem is, and this is right in your neighborhood, there's 2 big dams planned for right on the other side of 1488. How much money is going to be involved in building a wetland and planting stuff versus hiring contractors and digging holes and paving roads? And oh, by the way, those guys also make donations to politicians. Yeah. Conservation has never been a particularly lucrative voice for people who need money for their next campaign. The developer who's going to make money, the contractor, and the guy that's going to sell the land. One proposal is to channelize right through the George Mitchell through the Woodlands. Come in and a friend of mine who's an engineer calculated that'd be like something like 250 dump trucks a day running down Creekside Forest for like 5 years. So if you're concerned about traffic, there's another issue. But you have to try and ask, when these bond issues come up, when politicians come up, ask them to do some modern hydrological monitoring and changes, not just let's go build another dam or something. When we do that, that's what happens. You know, I'm sure the people in Kingwood would not really want us to drain upstream in the San Jacinto a whole lot faster, you think? I mean, so you need to try and reduce it, hold it, and then dissipate the water over a longer period of time. And we know how to do that. We just choose not to. When you have a concrete channel, you don't have any trees, so you don't have any shade. When you don't have any shade, the water temperature goes up. When the water temperature goes up, the creatures that live in the water die or don't reproduce. So a natural, go down into the middle of Houston and you look at one of those old concrete channels and you guess how much, you know, you have living in there versus if you go up here to the unimproved part of Spring Creek. The natural cooler water, less sediment, more balanced pH, doesn't happen when man starts doing artificial things. I think we've talked about this. You want to take a 5-minute stretch? Let's hold it right here. Do whatever, 5, 10.
We'll start again at 11.
Okay. Before I move on to the boring but important stuff, just talking to one of your classmates, and she made a great point. You know, I mentioned the Bayou Land Conservancy, and that's one organization that I really encourage people to look at. But even though my crew goes out there with chainsaws and builds things and all that, there's a million things you can do as a volunteer for any organization. They need people, and I'm not just seeing the one that I work for or work with, but everybody needs people who will volunteer to do outreach, who will volunteer to do office work, volunteer to go man a table at a nature festival. I mean, if you have time and you're looking for worthy things to do, go find one, because it doesn't have to be you're out there, you know, chopping down trees. Okay. Although chainsaws are a lot of fun. Just saying.
Back up a little bit.
Sure.
We have tons of wash beds.
I couldn't.
The wash beds.
Oh, yeah.
Are those just fried?
You're trying like the dry arroyos and stuff. Yeah, like in Utah, same sort of thing. You get intermittent streams, intermittent runoff, and it doesn't qualify as a wetland because it's not wet enough of the year. But like if you're in an area like that, or parts of Utah, Nevada, and you see, you know, a dry stream bed and you see, for example, willows there, you know that the water table is right under that sand. So if that's a survival trick, by the way, if you're ever lost in in the desert, look for those trees. But yeah, so they don't qualify as a wetland, but they're definitely shaped by the water. So that. Before I drive on here, I just want to make sure everybody's cool with the concept of the different kinds of wetlands and what makes a wetland. And in our part of the world, the riparian corridors are the really big deal. That's what's along the West Fork, the Sand Jack, or Willow Creek or Spring Creek, riparian corridors. And that's where we're trying to do the FEMA buyout or something to back people out. There is some legal protection. I made it sound like the pirates are just running amok. It's not quite that bad. There are federal laws and state laws that impact wetlands and what can be done to it. The biggie is this one, the Clean Water Act, federal law, and it prohibits messing in any way, basically. But the trick is it's got to be navigable waters. That's how the feds can get involved because it's interstate commerce. If it wasn't navigable, it doesn't affect another state, and therefore the feds don't get a vote. But if that, and there is a very technical definition of what is navigable, and there's arguments all the time. Well, the Red River is dried out and now it's not navigable above this geographic point. But if you have affected waterway and you want to build something along there, you need a federal permit. And you think this is academic, but if you drive Rayford Road and you drive all the way down south till Rayford Road ends, you got Bender's Land, not Bender's Land, with that big subdivision there, big giant, yeah, I think. Anyway, that was all wetland, and a developer just decided to go in there and build houses, and was caught doing that, and ended up in federal court and had to do some offsets, and it was a big deal. But people to this day go build stuff that affects a regulated waterway.
And that's a quick question.
Sure,
So,
I won't answer it. But
Caney Creek is
Mhm.
navigable by kayak. Is that navigable?
depends who's in office.
That's why I was asking.
Mhm.
Figured.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit. It, tell you, hold that thought and we'll talk about it just a little bit. Clean Water Act here, because the states just said, well, we'll just start issuing permits. Because, and so the federal government said, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that. So if you're gonna do a permit, it's got to comply with the federal law. And that reined in a bunch of rogue states, one of which we live in. Okay. So, this really isn't a new idea, 1899. Because people were just building ports and docks and stuff wherever, and if you had a slip for your cargo ship in the port of Boston, and some guy started dumping fill next to it, so suddenly, so it became a big deal. But there's a cool thing about this. This law actually takes into account, does that waterway impact birds, migratory birds, and puts restrictions. Now, what's cool about that is there are 4 countries that signed up for that. And it's the same with the migratory, I think all protected species. Mexico, Canada, the US, and guess who the 4th country is? Russia.
Ooh,
Yeah,
wow, wasn't
because
expecting
of the Alaskan.
that. Yes.
Yeah, So you have the Clean Water Act is the biggie. That's the one that you're gonna read about in the paper all the time. The Endangered Species Act, person asked me the other day, we've got those stupid Egyptian geese are starting to colonize my neighborhood. And you can harass them, you can trap them, you can shoot them with a slingshot because they are not a protected species. They're a non-protected invasive. Now, if you do that to a Canada goose, you can end up in jail. So you better know your birds. You're going to start, shooting birds. Taking also means habitat destruction. So if you've got a protected species, think Jones Forest. Right up here, red cockaded woodpecker. Okay?
Yes.
That's the reason it hadn't been turned into a subdivision. Is because it's a protected species and the habitat destruction is illegal. This is a cool one. The swamp buster. So they had a problem with farmers, mainly in the Midwest, just going in and draining stuff on their land. It was on their land. It wasn't on navigable waterway. So the feds had no control over that. Except anybody here ever grow up on a farm, large scale ag? Well, the only way farmers can stay in business is with crop insurance. And a lot of them get paid to not grow stuff. Okay, that's federal money. So the feds said, sure, you want to drain this lovely swamp, that's great, put in crops, but you're not going to get any crop insurance. Good luck. So that slowed down the rate of destruction of those kinds of wetlands. And here's the other one that's the same for the same. I'm going to learn how to do this about the time y'all go home.
Need to drink beer.
And now we just turned it off. All right. Y'all want to come back in 15 minutes?
There.
Same 4 countries did the Migratory Bird Act. So Alaska, Canada, US, Mexico, which I just thought was interesting because I just never would have thought that, had to be in a different period. Texas basically does squat. That's a technical master naturalist term you all need to work on. And there's some great people at, like Parks and Wildlife and all. I love the people, but by the mandate of most Texas agencies is to give advice and, counsel with ranchers and folks like that. Tech Parks and Wildlife does look after state-owned land. Guess how much state-owned land we have?
Minimum. What the percent?
You know who the biggest landowner in Texas is? TxDOT. You were in the seminar at the yeah, people think it's the King Ranch. No, it's your Texas Highway Department. They own all those medians and stuff. So Texas, I don't even want to say their name. Water permits. This is what we were talking about before. The water development boards, they're regional. There's 16, not 12. I misspoke. And you are in one. And they're the ones that are going to, propose what gets the funding and what gets built.
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
I did some research on that. Go look up the Texas Water Development Boards. And it's staggering the amount of money that is controlled by an agency you may have never heard of.
And they're not elected, by the way, they're appointed.
It's tens of billions of dollars in money toward.
I have a good friend who's on the Brazos River Board. And his qualifications, and he's a great guy and he's a smart guy, is he was a representative at the particular political party's national convention. And so he got appointed to the board.
Wow.
So that's kind of how that works. They're controlling gazillions of dollars. You ought to just go read the plan. They'll do whatever supposedly is for the next 50 years. That's gonna be your Texas. So let's just recap a little bit here. What's a wetland? Is it wet? Is the soil show it's wet? And has it got wet loving plants? That's a wetlands. Now, it may or may not be a protected wetland, it may be a whatever, but every part of this huge state is gonna have different wetlands because of their hydrology. We didn't talk about it, the weather that impacts, you get 60 inches of rain a year, give or take. Most of West Texas gets around 8 to 10. So all of that impacts it. Flood control, big issue around here. Well, let's quit bulldozing the wetlands. That's a start. And really, I think the biggest threat, we're starting to recognize development needs to be controlled. But we got to accelerate that public appreciation. But I think the next thing is going to happen is going to be poorly designed and poorly executed human engineered things to address flooding and such. So, you know, read, stay abreast. And that's my pitch. So I'll be around. I did this early because I want to go drink beer. You know, questions, what would you like to talk about? Anything, or you just want to leave early, or what? I mean, any thoughts, concerns?
What we can do?
I have a question
Mhm.
about the Arrowwood River.
Mhm.
And all of that bottomland, hardwood, forested wetland that we've been working in.
Mhm.
Based on your description up there, it sounds like it's actually part of the riparian zone, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Up to the parking lot where,
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I didn't understand it that way.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you. That helped.
and she's talking about an area, it's a preserve, nature preserve, and it was being developed to be a sand mine 20 years ago. Sand mining is a huge issue. If you're not aware of that, go look at Google Earth and look along the San Jacinto or something, and 15 feet off the riverbank are huge sand mines. And when they mine the sand, they get water in those pits. And what do they do with the water? They dump it in the river. And when they dump it, they're dumping sand too. So not only are they tearing up the land, but they're destroying the drainage and the natural characteristics of that. So that area didn't turn into a sand mine because the subdivision neighbors across the street didn't want a sand mine. So they managed to block it. And now it's the Bayou Land Conservancy's got it as a developed, you know, facility for education. So.
You know anything about the new preserve? You know any new forest?
No. I mean, you'd have to show me on a map and I could, everyone throws these names at me and I don't know.
Is that the one that's along Lake Creek that county is going to be developing? Yeah, I think so. Okay. Off of Fish Street? Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's not right on the riverbed? That floods every time you get a lot of rain? Yeah, that's why it won't be developed as housing, which the development would have done if it could have, because it floods all the time. And so putting a park there and a nature preserve or what have you is a good use of that land. Because without the majority of it being impermeable surfaces, the water can actually soak into the land. And it has somewhere to go. That's not a house when it does flood. I didn't know they weren't putting a house in that. I thought we could do this shoot. That's good.
People, oh, sorry.
There would be some buildings, but I don't know the background of it. You'd have to look at the county's plan. I know they're gonna be putting in some restrooms and some things like that, but they'll be on the fire parking lot.
When you can't do a development. And this was the thing, you know, the Barker, you know, preserve out, you know, west of Katy and all the big, you know, the Corps of Engineers retention facility, the ADIX, where, you know, they went in and put subdivisions inside the holding area. The smart developers and people with those lands find one of two things to do with them. They do like out there where you found a way to have a commercial value. In that case, they put in a shooting range. So when floods came, you just didn't go shoot. Or sometimes people put in golf courses. The Woodlands has got a faction that is lobbying for this 2,000 acres off Gosling to be a golf course. But the other thing they do is put it under a conservation easement with people like that organization I keep naming, which is a land trust. And how many people here have heard of the Nature Conservancy? So let me explain how that works. If I've got a piece of property that's appraised for like $2 million, and it turns out it's in a floodplain and I can't develop it. So I've got this, what am I going to do? Well, if it's got some ecological value and I could talk the Nature Conservancy into putting a conservation easement on it, the value of that $2 million property now drops to about $60,000 because it can't be developed. You say, well, John, you just took a hell of a hit there, 2 million to 60. Yes, I did. And I'm going to write off my taxes for the next 2 decades. So I just got a huge tax break for getting rid of this property that I couldn't do anything with. And actually, if you think about it, it's kind of a win-win deal. Okay? So it's not evil and corrupt, but that's how land trusts and work. So there is some value in that land after all. I'm sorry.
On the, what you were talking about a second ago with that area, you said they were gonna create a park and the county is going to create, I guess, this park. Will the county plant like native riparian plants?
I don't know, wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah, that seems like what they should do, but I don't know who decides at the county what they plant and if they're interested in native and the.
Talk to your commissioner. Talk to the commissioner for that precinct for that park facility. I'm not sure which one it is.
Diane is absolutely right. That's the kind of thing that you all have a direct impact on. Because you have people who are used to building roads in some cases, and they want to throw ryegrass out there and, you know, plant whatever. And then you have some of the people who work on those things are actually very educated and caring, and they'd want to be planting, you know, bunch grass and various, you know, Gulf Coast muley or whatever it is. So,
And you mentioned that TxDOT is the largest landowner in the state, and that's a good example of a steward of the land that is trying to make sure they're planting native. They didn't always do that.
Yep.
But they sent all the people that work for TxDOT landscaping, I don't know what they exactly call that, but taking care of that land, maintaining it. They sent them all through the Texas Master Naturalist Program, and they're all very dedicated to native plants for the region of Texas that that piece of highway is in. So if you drive along and you see wildflowers, if you see native trees, that was TxDOT planting the right things there.
and that's where, you know, it's all is not lost, folks, even though I'm up here, you know, talking doom and gloom. There are people who are getting the message, but we have to encourage them.
The youngers.
You're up.
John, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The things John was talking about are personally near and dear to my heart. I got into the Master Naturalist organization. I got interested by becoming a Texas water specialist, which is an 8-hour program, very easy to do. happening again in in Woodlands area for the county. That's there and I've taken a deep dive into water in Texas, which can get pretty scary to do, no pun intended, you have to die, so. A couple of things, places, if, ways to get involved. We talked about, going to your precinct commissioner, writing people. One of the things that I have done, and I would encourage you, if you've been this way, to look at, there's actually training where you can be certified as a riparian monitor, so that you get a spot somewhere that'll be assigned through the Texas Stream King, which is an organization headquartered in San Marcos. And then twice a year, you go assess the riparian area and give them a report, which becomes part of the database that's there. It's easy to do, teaches you a lot about riparian assessment. There's also core monitoring. Stephanie and I both took the training, which they offer around the area. We took it last summer, I guess it was. And so we have a spot where we go do dissolved oxygen monitoring. We look at the riparian area, we monitor the pH, the conductivity, which tells you what chemicals may or may not be in the water. So we do that once a month. Everything provided by the organization, again, this is through the HGAC, the Houston Galveston Area Council. Is there, so there's a lot of those kind of things available, and they count as volunteer hours. And you can use them also as part of your Texas Water Specialist volunteer work. This is all personal stuff, I'm sorry. If you're looking for a book to read that talks about riparian areas and naturally restoring those, there's a book by Layla Phillips called Beaverland. I don't know if anybody's read this book. That is amazing. It's about how that little rodent basically changed the shape of America as well as the economy of America, and still is coming back as a natural way to do just what you heard about here. So, a little light reading. It's by Layla Phillips. It's here. I found it interesting that what he was talking about tied in very closely to what we heard last week from Addison Gaines about urban ecology and the ethics in the environment. So go back and look at your notes from what Addison talked about. It will a very close tie-in to what's going on here. Following on to that, you heard Addison talk about, and I think you've heard a couple of other times, that Texas Master Naturalists, this is not a political organization. So as you send letters, send as an individual to these people. I mean, you can mention, I learned about this but you're not representing, I'm representing myself as a citizen that's here. And remember that Master Naturalist, what we are pro is the environment. And that kind of is the overarching goal that we have here. Not political, but environmental. So it's important that we maintain the integrity of the naturalist organization that's there. All right, enough of my speech making. Let's hear. Next week, next Saturday morning, you stay in your jammies. It's a Zoom call. The training that's there, it's Matt Murch is doing a Zoom call, and it's on ecology.
Ecoregion.
Ecoregions.
The ecoregions
It's on
of
geologic
Texas.
regions. Today you'll see ecoregions, yet another set of regions. I don't remember how many, but I think there's a bunch. There'll be a break. We'll be done by 10 with that. I would encourage you to talk to your fellow interns, because at noon, we're meeting down off Pruitt Road, and Virginia's gonna put a map showing there. There's limited parking for this field trip. So if any of you want to carpool, meet somewhere, there's a Starbucks not far away from there, meet, have a coffee, carpool down to there. It'll make it a lot easier, because there's, I don't know, there's parking a ways away, but there's just a few spots right there. And be prepared for a walk. in the woods. Wear some good shoes because there's some climbing up and down some embankments to get down into the riparian area. If you want to do that.
Do we need like waterproof boots or?
No, I don't think, we're not going into the water. And
Closed toe.
closed toe. Watch and we'll talk about it probably on the Zoom. There is scheduled rain for Wednesday and Thursday
Oh, yeah.
this week, so Spring Creek may be up. So there could be some mud to deal with along there.
Yeah, so Matt's list of things to think about are closed-toed shoes, a hat, sunglasses, depending on
Mhm.
what is outside. He suggests long pants because you might be walking through some brush. And you don't want to get poison ivy. Water, a snack, sunscreen, bug spray, and maybe a notebook and pen. The snack and he also had a backpack, at least water. We're only gonna be out there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, so you don't really, unless you really need snacks and really need a backpack. Bug spray, it might depend on how cold it gets this
Yeah.
week. And notebook and pen to take notes, and I'll show you where it is. So we are up here, up 242, and we're gonna go down here. So this is Sawdust Road right here.
Yes.
So, and wherever you live, I don't know how you'll get there, but down here off Sawdust Road, there's an area near, so this is a Spring Creek, Montgomery County Preserve down here. And off, I think this is Booty Road, I'm not sure what road,
Yeah.
Pruitt
Yes.
Road, that's Pruitt Road. You go past the RV storage place and you'll turn here, there's a big ballpark in here.
This is South County Football League fields.
Is that the recycling?
Yeah, the recycling center is
Okay.
right by the recycling.
And there's a gymnastics place here, and you're gonna turn and you're gonna go down here, and this is the parking lot that we're gonna leave from, so you can see there's not very many parking spots. So if you know somebody you can carpool with, that would be fantastic.
That's the idea.
And the trailhead is like right here, and we're gonna walk, let me zoom out a little bit. We're gonna walk, I don't know which way he's gonna go, whether it's this way or that way, but we're gonna go, there's a bridge here across the creek. And we're gonna spend a lot of time on this point bar and look at the geology around here. And then I think he came over here and went down either here or over here to look at some other, he went over here to look where
Where
the
Spring
two
Creek,
creeks come
yeah,
together.
Panther Branch
Creeks come together.
together.
So here you're just gonna be on a bridge and then walking on some sand, but here's the potential to walk through some trails that are, a little tighter. And then be down in maybe a muddier part, depending on what the weather has been.
Where's the alternative parking in case the other?
Well, so one thing for sure is do not park in the football sports field parking lot or they will get really mad and they might tow your car. I would try to carpool. And then I don't know if there's any other alternative parking. I mean, there's probably about 25 spots there, so if a couple people carpool, that'd be great.
Will the second half over here be pre-recorded or not pre-recorded?
No, we will not record it because it's just too hard out in the field with a phone. We tried it last year and it just did not work. And this is a really great field trip. Afterwards, everybody was like, wow, I didn't know you could see so many things in a pile of sand.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
So we highly encourage you to come, if you can come. It's a good one.
All right,
I think that's it.
I have 11:32.
So you still get your 4 hours.
In
though.
4 hours credit, you get 28 minutes back in your life. See you next
So
week.
you can use that 28 minutes to come to the field trip.